A Sunday morning, Eddie Lowen would be a little bit busy, but he arranged his schedule, and he and Sharon both agreed to come and share a little bit of their parenting wisdom with us. And if you don't know them, Eddie is our lead minister at Westside, and they both have kids who have gone up through junior high school, and are both in college now, so they've kind of been in your parents' shoes, and they have some wisdom to share with us this morning, and they're going to try to answer some of the questions that you guys submitted over this month. So if you guys want to come up and join us, Eddie and Sharon, can you guys thank them for coming this morning? Well, before we jump into your questions and some of the questions that we had this morning, if you haven't been on social media this week, it's only fair that we expose everyone to the awkward family photos that some of you may have seen. So we've got a picture of their family. So that is a number of years ago. Christina's 19 and Evan's 21 now, so they're a little older. But there's their own awkward family photo. And since Sharon was giving me the pictures, we got a bonus photo of Eddie. So nice. Lots of stash comments this week.
Come on, Eddie. Why don't you have a mustache?
Bring it back. Looking good. Bring it back. I don't think we would allow you to hear my kids if you had that mustache. Is that just your bare chest? Is it your bare chest under there with the necklace?
No, that's a shirt.
Oh, you got a shirt. Okay. Whatever. So we've got a few questions for you, but before we jump into like your parent questions, I'm curious if we asked your parents, like if we went back and asked your parents what you guys were like when you were in high school, how would they have described you as a kid, especially when you were in high school, but just in general you as a kid? So Sharon, you want to go first? What were you like as a kid?
I was smiling and easygoing and kind of shy until I hit junior high, and then I was very hyper. So much so that I didn't know this until several years ago, but my mother told me that she took me to my pediatrician and asked him if I was ADD.
So you didn't know? It was like a slide, yeah, we're just going to go see the doctor.
Yeah, I had no idea that she had had that conversation with him, so yeah.
Okay. Quiet and then ADD, almost. All right, and then Eddie?
Active, talkative, disobedient. That pretty much sums it up.
Active, talkative, disobedient. Same as now, right?
Pretty much sums it up.
All right. Well, jumping into just parenting in general, what would you guys say your biggest joys in parenting? Like, what is the highlight moments? What gives you the most joy as parents at whatever point through your different stages of parenting? What has given you the most joy to be a parent?
I've had a chance to think about this since my last answer for junior high. Love being pregnant, feeling the baby move inside of me. Life, fell in love with my child before they were even born. That was very, very joyful. Seeing my kids become confident, because insecurity is something that I think most people struggle with growing up, and just to see them become a little more confident in who they are and who God made them to be, and for them to accept their personalities, their strengths, their weaknesses, but ultimately seeing them own their own faith. We try to bring them up into church and read the Bible to them when they're little, and you assume that your kids are going to have a faith of their own, but that doesn't happen for every child and every family. So finally, when I could see that their faith was real, that they really loved the Lord, that was very, very joyful.
Yeah.
I love being pregnant too.
That was a joke.
Watching my kids make good decisions is really one of the things I've really enjoyed about being a parent. And sometimes we parents blow it, and when our kids make good decisions, we don't say anything. And when they make bad decisions, we want to talk about it. But you can bet that your parents always find joy in seeing you make a good choice, make a good decision, figure something out. I enjoy seeing my kids learn how to do new stuff. I enjoy teaching my son how to play golf, and I enjoyed helping them figure out how to how to handle situations. And most of us as little kids, we look back at some awkward time when we were little kids or teens or something, and my son jokes about how awkward he was, and now he's a guy with a really great sense of humor. People love him a lot. He gets along with just about everybody, and so it's been fun to see him go from being that awkward kid that didn't know what to do around other people to being a guy who's nobody's enjoyed by everyone, but a lot of people like him.
What about if we flip it? Like, what are some of the biggest struggles? Not necessarily specifically with your kids, but as you go through parenthood and have to navigate those tough times, what are some of the struggles that you've had to go through trying to be a parent, being the best parent you can be?
There are a lot of struggles. It's so hard being a parent, and I looked so forward to being a parent when my kids were born, but I had no idea how difficult it was going to be. It's hard to parent a daughter when you're a mom, I think, and because I have a lot of relationships with high school girls. Most girls struggle with their relationship with their mom in high school. I think there's this power play, who's the mom, who's in charge at home, and we tend to be together more than probably a mom and a son, so there are lots of opportunity for clashes, and so that probably took me off guard and was a little bit of a struggle. And in high school years too, since you guys are high schoolers, it was really hard to let your kids make mistakes. And there's a term you might hear called helicopter parents nowadays, where parents want to save their children from everything. They want to do your homework for you. They want to fill out your scholarship applications, your college applications. They want to bring you your homework and things when you forget it at school. And as a parent, you want to save your children from consequences. But it was really, really hard for me to learn and to realize that my kids needed to make mistakes, and they needed to have consequences for their mistakes if it meant get a 0 on an assignment or miss a deadline. And it's really hard to let your kids fail, but I think that's when my kids are growing the most, when they make their own mistakes and learn how to recover from them.
Okay.
I think when kids are little, it's really hard as a parent if you see them mistreated or if you see them treated unfairly. Most parents give their kids the benefit of the doubt, but then they walk into a world of school and with other kids where they're not given the benefit of the doubt, and that can be really difficult for parents. One of the things that was tough, and I think it's tough throughout parenthood, is because sometimes you want more for your kid than your kid wants for himself or herself. And you can see the benefit, you can see the advantage of it. And the kid's like, I see no benefit, I see no advantage. Sometimes I don't trust you enough just to do it because they think you may have a little wisdom as mom or dad, but that's tough. One of the most difficult things about parents is remembering that you are sacrificially, really. I mean, once you have a kid, you build your entire schedule around this child. You build your entire life around this child. You make decisions based on what's good for this child. But as a parent, one of the tough things is realizing that you're doing that so that your kid will one day not need you. And some parents don't figure that out. Some kids don't figure that out. But you're doing all of that so that one day they can do life well and make good decisions without you being there to give instant advice and instant feedback. And so one difficult thing as a parent is knowing that you're going to pour so much into this human being. And if you are successful, that human being will graduate from high school, go to college, work, whatever, and not need your advice every day. Now hopefully there'll be a friendship that forms in adulthood. They'll come back, they'll ask for your advice. But if you do your job well, they don't need you. And some parents freak out about that because you've done everything for them, and then some parents get really kind of weird. They want the child to build their life around them, and that gets all funky. So if you're successful, they don't need as much.
That is a tricky balance, I'm sure. One of the question that may be a little bit more for you, Sharon, than it could be for either of you, but some of the specific questions that you guys asked, a couple of them that kind of relate. One was just, why doesn't my mom listen to me? And maybe a little easier one to answer in general is, how can we get our parents to listen to us?
You can't.
Well,
Thanks for the encouragement.
from a mom-daughter perspective, it's very interesting. Christina and I have always been close, but there were clashes, the mother-daughter thing going on. But I had relationships with some of her friends. Always loved girls and teen girls, and I realized at some point I was a much better listener with the girls who were not my own children. And Christina even said to me once, "You don't really listen to me." I was always doing stuff when Christina and I were together, had my agenda, trying to cook, clean, do all these things. And the difference was when I was with other girls, all my attention was focused on them. I wasn't doing 10 million other things, so I could really listen. And with my own child, I would talk at her instead of conversing and have a conversation, trying to solve their problems. But with other girls, I would listen, and we would have a dialogue, a conversation, and we'd be talking at them. So at some point that clicked with me, and I became a much better listener, and Christina even said to me, "You don't really listen." So you may need to tell your mom that. You may need to say, instead of doing 10 million other things, come sit down with me. Or you may suggest to your mom that you have a coffee date where she's not distracted by 10 million other things. But I also think that you have to earn the right to be listened to. Sometimes your emotions get the best of you, and you're so comfortable with your mom, and you blow up and you get angry. So if you want them to listen to you, you also need to kind of handle yourself well.
Okay. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but one of the questions this question isn't directly a student question, but it kind of summarizes several. So there were questions like, why do my parents flip out when I mention a girl I might be interested in, lecture me about it? Why do my parents criticize the music I listen to? Several things like that. Let me kind of direct that into a more general thing and just say, can you guys answer this question? Why do my parents overreact when I make a mistake?
Or when you haven't necessarily made a mistake,
Well,
but they're afraid, they're afraid that you might. Yeah, I thought about this a lot. I actually thought about this from my own perspective. When I thought about my worst parenting moments, when I lost my temper, when I wasn't utilizing all the skills that I use when I'm talking with other people, and my kids were getting just a worse version of me. What I realized is that my worst parenting moments were due to the fact that I was afraid about something. And I don't know if you sense this in your parents, but if you wonder why you get these emotional or angry or just intense responses from your parents, I think I can tell you why. It's all wrapped up in the word fear. Because the worst fear of a parent is that his or her child is going to make mistakes that will change their lives in negative ways. And see, as adults, just because of the way our brains form, we have the ability, once we hit 25 and beyond, we just, biologically, we think further ahead. And before that point in life, we don't think ahead as naturally and as clearly. Parents are always thinking ahead on behalf of their kids. So they see you doing things, they can see some potential negative consequences, and so all of a sudden, your dad is angry or your mom is angry or there's all of this intensity, and you're like, what's the big deal? Well, it may not be as big a deal as what they're depicting at that time, it may be a bigger deal than you realize, but if you want to know why your parents do that, I really believe that most of the time when they react that way, it's because of fear. I think my worst moments as a parent were because I saw the potential that my kid would go a certain direction or do a certain thing. I thought about the consequences of that, didn't like that, I was afraid on their behalf, and so instead of staying calm and kind of walking through that, I would get emotional about it. So I think the answer to the question is fear. When parents are afraid that their kids are going the wrong way, making poor choices, that's when parents get all fired up or emotional.
I'm going to add something to that. Your parents have their own story. And when you're really, truly mature and grown up, you'll realize that. And sometimes your parents aren't necessarily afraid of you making a mistake, but they make mistakes, and they don't want you to suffer consequences like they did. So sometimes they parent out of fear of what you may do, but they parent out of fear of what they did, and they want something different from you.
Yeah, and as you guys have talked about this throughout the morning, it's taken me back to a few weeks ago. We talked about how to build trust with your parents and how a lot of it is communication. And we use the illustration of driver's ed and how if your parents get that the fake brake, the third extra brake that's not really real, but they hold on tight, and especially moms, at least my mom, and still today. But if you communicate, like I see this truck up ahead. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm looking at it. I see it. You don't have to freak out because I know what's going to happen. And I'm going to get in the other lane. And if they know that you understand what situation you're in, and they see that you are, in fact, looking ahead, it seems like that would help that a little bit, like that overreaction, the tendency to overreact, because if you can see that they understand what they're looking ahead at, like it's not just you looking ahead, they are actually talking to you about how they're looking ahead and how they have things lined up. Would that help in that situation if you could understand? Like, let me put it into another question. What advice would you give a student? This is kind of taking this into an even more serious realm. Like when you really do have to talk about a big issue and you need to go to your parents to talk about it. What advice would you give to a student who needed to approach their parent about something like being pregnant or questions about homosexuality or something else major, like big things? Like, what advice would you give if students need to go to their parents and talk about something like that?
I think anytime you're facing a tough conversation, it's better to acknowledge it at the beginning. And it really, first of all, choose the right, think about what's a good time. And even try to set it up. Hey, can we set aside a half hour or so to talk about something? But as you introduce it, I think it's usually good just to lay it out plainly with as little emotion as possible. And this is the situation. But just before you say that, maybe say, I know this is going to be hard to hear. I know this will be tough to hear. If you have a parent who tends to get very emotional or angry a lot or whatever, you can say, don't give them a lecture. You don't like lectures, they don't either. But you can say, I know this is the kind of thing that would probably make you feel a lot of emotions, but I need to have a conversation. But then you should probably expect that there will be some emotion. And I think what I would say is, don't let that moment, a lot of times we don't start conversations, we don't initiate conversations because we don't want to deal with that moment that they hear it, and then we get the emotion comes to the surface and all that. You just have to realize that there's something beyond that. And so you have to push through that, you push through the moment, you push through the awkward thing of saying it, you push through the likelihood that you're going to get this emotional response, if that's the personality of your mom or dad. And then you work through that in order to get to the other side and talk about it. And then whenever you're having a conversation, it's really important not just to come to talk, but to come to listen. But I like saying things very plainly and straightforward, and then trying to discuss them with as little emotion as possible. I think that's when you get things done.
And Eddie said timing. For me, those conversations, timing is everything. And if you can learn not to say what's on your mind at the moment it's on your mind, but take time to pray about it, don't underestimate praying about that conversation before you have it with your parents. And also, for me, being a teenager, having another godly adult that I could have pray for me at the moment I'm going to have a conversation, who is helping me talk through the situation before I have the conversation with my parents, that was huge for me.
You know, one other thing that I think would really help, if you know that you have to tell your parents something, let's say that it does involve a questionable choice or a bad decision or something you did wrong, and you need to have that conversation. First of all, it is better for them to hear it from you than to find out otherwise. That's really good. But the other thing that would really help is for you just to acknowledge, because sometimes our attitude toward our parents is, look, your job is to forgive me, your job is to it would probably help sometimes to say, I know this disappoints you. I know you would prefer that I had not done that. If you just acknowledge that there may be some pain or discomfort or awkwardness for them, I think it could go a long way. And again, that's part of not just thinking about yourself when you're going into this conversation. It's not just about how you feel. It is about your parents, and especially if it is something, if you have to share a bad decision or consequences of a bad decision, just to acknowledge, I know it disappoints you, could go a long way.
So you guys have you've both been in high school, and however many years later you are now. And so you have a kind of different perspective. You have had a high school perspective and a parent perspective. So if you, just as a wrap-up question, if you could go back and talk to your high school self, so Sharon, if you could talk to high school Sharon and give her one piece of advice, not just about family stuff, I mean maybe it involves that, but just in general, what piece of advice would you give yourself when you were in high school?
Not to be boy crazy, and not to think that that's what life is all about, is finding that perfect person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with.
Because you're going to have to settle with him, right?
I mean, I think that's what girls really are longing for, and I think that we wrap our self-esteem and our identity in not just our looks, but our relationships with the right crowd, popular people, having a boyfriend, and then we jump from boyfriend to boyfriend. One of the best things that I did when I finally grew up, my senior year, I didn't date anyone, and I had a boyfriend off and on, for several years. And that was really a growing time in my life. It was a time that I wasn't going to date. I wasn't going to focus on boys. I was going to focus on my relationship with the Lord. And my youth minister's wife mentored and discipled me. And I invested in relationships with other women and more with my mom. And I think God used that time to help prepare me to be a better wife in the future. But that's, your ultimate worth and purpose is going to be found in God. It's not going to be found in other people. And that's really hard to grasp when you're in high school. It's easy for me to say now because I am married, but that's what I would tell my high school self.
What's you ready? What would you tell Sharon in high school? No, what would you tell yourself?
I tell myself to just be more comfortable and to be okay with the goofiness and the awkwardness and the imperfection of being a teenage guy, and not feel like, not to believe the thing, that to be a man you have to kind of like push all your emotions down, and it should be a fun time of life. It should be a time of life. I mean, all of us want to figure stuff out and do things well, but we're learning a lot during high school. So I tell myself just not to worry about impressing people so much. Looking back, I'm really glad for some decisions I made. I'm glad I'm glad I didn't do the drug thing. I'm glad I wasn't part of the drinking scene. I'm glad I chose to be involved in church. You know, there were a number of times when my friends were doing. I had non-church. I had a school set of friends. I had a church set of friends. Is it that way for any of you? It's great when they're the same set. But I had a school set of friends, and most of those guys had like gone to church as little kids a few times, but they didn't go to church. They, you know, the whole idea of serving God, pleasing God, my life belonging to God, it wasn't the way they thought. And so I made the choice that I was going to connect with my church and student ministry at my church. And there were times my friends were doing things and I went with the church. Well, that was really good because so many of those times what they were into really wasn't good. It would not have been helpful. It would have been contrary to my faith and to the decisions I was trying to make. So I would tell myself I made some really good decisions hanging out with kids at church and being a big part of that. Here's what I didn't know. When I would go back from college over Christmas break or something, get together with my high school friends. They could never say it when they were in high school. They would not have even known how to form the words to say it. But over Christmas break in college, they would look at me and say, really admired you for being a church guy. I mean, they didn't use words like Christ follower and stuff like that, but they were just saying that they noticed it and they thought it was a good thing. And so they do notice. They'll never tell you during high school, but they do notice.
Well, before we let you guys go, since we have you in the room, would you kind of close our time together by just praying for our students, maybe Sharon praying for the girls and Eddie praying for the guys just to wrap up our time?
God, I thank you so much for each and every student that is in this room. And Lord, I pray that that as they're searching for their purpose, their meaning in life, Father, that you open their eyes and help them to realize that their purpose and their life is in you. I pray, Lord, that you help them to celebrate who you created them to be, and that instead of wanting to be like everyone else, that they'll realize that you created them the way they are for a reason. Help them to accept their personalities and their strengths instead of wanting to be like everyone else. I pray, Father, that you just help them to realize that no person, no man, no friendship is ever going to satisfy them, Lord, that only you are going to ultimately satisfy all their needs, Father. Protect them from the evil one who wants to convince them of so many lies. I pray blessings on them, Father.
And God, I pray for the guys here today. I really thank you for them. I thank you for making them young men. And I just want to ask that you would work in a very direct and powerful way in each of their lives. God, we know that the message of our culture is that our high school years and our college years are all about having fun, seeking pleasure, and using other people for ourselves. And I just pray that each of these guys would realize that what you're doing is you're guiding them toward manhood. And I pray that each of us would want to be the men that you have in mind for us to be, and that we would realize that that's really where the fulfillment and the joy is. And we know that you'll help us have lots of fun along the way. And we know that if we learn how to love people and think about other people, that we'll have great friends, that you'll take care of directing our lives, that you're looking ahead at our futures. And so God, I pray for these guys that you just not allow them to buy the identity that they are sold by all the movies. And it seems to be, the broad road. I mean, Jesus talked about it. And Jesus, you said there's a wide road, everybody goes down it. And then there's a narrow road that leads to life. And since we all want a great life, help us to walk the narrow road and to let you show us the positive results. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, Eddie and Sharon, thank you for all of your influence at Westside, both in us personally and at the church. And I appreciate you guys making the time and taking the time to come and share with us this morning. Can you guys